We will discuss this morning the question of relevance of Jesus for the 21st century. And this is not an easy issue. If you look at the world and what is going on, especially in the world of academia, you will see that the times in which we live are the times of times when all the ideologies which existed in the past, and these ideologies were carrying humanity forward, these ideologies do not exist anymore, or they are not relevant to the people. Some people are saying, maybe I couldn't use that one for you, who are, maybe I'm not doing something well, but it was not functioning. So I hear some. Should I go back a little bit? Because I hear some sounds. So this is the time of, some intellectuals are saying these are the times of the death of ideologies. You probably know that there were many ideologies in the history of humankind. There were, for example, communism. I come from that part of the world, and some people really believe that communism is going to bring something good. Many people went to war because of their deep convictions that this is something that will help humanity to bring kind of society which will bring happiness to human beings. There were many other ideologies in humanity. Some people believe that capitalism, and especially liberal capitalism, will bring to humanity some kind of. People are saying this is the best, probably the best ideology for human society. If you read today some of the key thinkers about the liberal capitalism, they would tell you, no, this is not the right way to go. For example, Slavoj Žižek from Slovenia, who is one of the key thinkers of the West today, or Noam Chomsky from the United States, they will tell you there is a death of liberal capitalism. It is not something that will bring something good to humanity. There is, for example, theory of reincarnation, which is one worldview which exists, and millions of people today believe that this is something that probably can give to humanity something that humanity is longing for. There are many. Islam is something that is today many people believe, especially even those who do not belong to that religion. Maybe Islam is something that can help us to go forward. But as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the time of death of ideologies. It seems that people are skeptical and they do not believe anymore in any ideology. And the question to us Christians is Christianity something that is appealing to humanity in the 21st century? And even better, we can ask the question, is the person of Jesus Christ relevant to humanity for the 21st century? As you know, many people will tell you no. We live in a post-Christian era where Christianity has given us what it had, and we have to look for other ways, for other ideologies which will bring to humanity peace and happiness. So, is Jesus really relevant for the 21st century? And of course, as long as we are closed within the church walls, we may have different perception. But as we get into discussion and dialogue with people outside of the church walls, we may get different perception and different understanding of what we are often repeating and believing. What I'm going to try to do this morning is I'm going to try to analyze the so-called being of humanity. There is a study in theology and in philosophy, which is called ontology. Ontology is the study of being, of the nature of something, without which that something cannot be that something, whatever it is. Aristotle used the term substance. If we are talking about any substance in the world, and if we are talking about ontology of that substance, we are talking about something without which that something cannot exist. As we look at the being of humanity as a whole, we can speak about some essential elements of humanity as a whole, and then, as I'm going to mention a few of them, we will see whether Jesus is still appealing to these elements or not. So this is the method that we are going to try to use today. So it seems to me, one of the key characteristics of the being of humanity as a whole is what Friedrich Nietzsche called the will to power. Will to power. If you take the textbooks of the children that we saw just a few moments ago here, if you take their history textbooks, the whole history of humanity is nothing but the history of struggle for power. History for struggle. I think somebody calculated, I read this recently somewhere, that only 200 and something years in the whole human history that we know of were the years without wars. All other time, humanity spent fighting each other and struggling for some kind of power. And if this is one nation against other nation. This is on the global, general level. But if we look at the individual level, you will notice that this is also there. We are constantly struggling to somehow for influence, for ruling over other people. And I worked for many years as a pastor, and I've seen, for example, elders in the church. Somebody was an elder for 20 years. Once when the time came for him to be replaced, he could not somehow find his way in the church. He became almost ill, I think. But this is the case with many ministers, I think, in the church. I know many ministers who leave from one conference session to another. I've seen this in the General Conference also. I served in the Committee of General Conference. So there are many people, even when they serve there for 15, 20 years, once they come to the end, they still ask to serve in some committees so that they can be some kind of important people. So yes, we all have this struggle for power. We want to somehow rule over others. And Friedrich Nietzsche, who is, I believe, one of the sharpest minds, that when I read Nietzsche, I feel a little bit intimidated, because there is such a power of mind that you find in his writings. And when you read, he believed that the main characteristics of humanity is that will to power. And he believed that human beings, by using that will to power, they can subdue the world, the chaos and flux of the world. And he was dreaming of creating a new man, Übermensch, Superman, which can rule the world. So yes, I think in many ways the world has been driven by that deep desire within human beings to rule over others. And if you think this is only on this level, I have just to remind you that the Bible says that in the universe itself, one of the driving forces when Lucifer started his fight in the universe, it was a kind, whatever that fight was. One astronomer told me, we don't know what kind of war was there in heaven, but it seems there was kind of war where there was struggle for power, when Lucifer said, I will raise my throne above the stars, above the Mount of Assembly. Obviously, the Mount of Assembly is the throne of God. This is the place where inhabitants of the whole universe would come to worship God. And Lucifer says, I would like to raise my throne above the Mount of Assembly and be there. So it seems that influence of that sin, the sin of Lucifer, is repeating itself throughout human history. And I think it makes humanity sick and ill. This is something that destroys humanity. It brings humanity to the state of self-destruction. If you think about all the weapons that humanity has, and how it goes forward, never, I don't remember, I'm 60 years old, I don't remember that ever the key politicians in the world have been mentioning so many times the use of nuclear weapons. So this is the time when sin has that self-destructing power in itself. So sin has brought humanity to this kind of situation that human beings are ready, in order to keep their power, to destroy each other. So I would like to tell you that Jesus was not without temptation to rule the world. He also was tempted to take power, political power, in his own hands. Let me just remind you, it was in our Sabbath School quarterly this week. The author mentioned Fyodor Dostoevsky, the great Russian author, one of the greatest that ever lived on this planet. And Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote one novel, The Brothers Karamazov, and one chapter in that novel, The Brothers Karamazov, is called The Grand Inquisitor. And in that Grand Inquisitor, Dostoevsky writes about Jesus coming to this planet again. And he put that scene in the Middle Ages, during the Spanish Inquisition. And Dostoevsky writes about one inquisitor that he called Grand Inquisitor, whose duty was on a daily basis to burn on the stake some infidels, some of those who apostatized. This was the job of the Grand Inquisitor according to Dostoevsky. And one day, as the Grand Inquisitor was getting ready to put some people on the stake and to burn them alive, he heard that there is somebody in the village, in the neighboring city. He came and he's healing sick people. He even resurrected somebody from the dead. And the Grand Inquisitor knew immediately it was Jesus. And he immediately sends his soldiers to arrest him. And he put Jesus into the jail. So the big question is, before I continue with Dostoevsky, how Christian church would receive Jesus today if he would come to this world? This is the question for the discussion. But here is how Dostoevsky perceived. Let me just remind you that the greatest sons of Russia are Leo Tolstoy and Fyodor Dostoevsky. Both of them. Tolstoy was disfellowshipped from the Russian Orthodox Church. And Dostoevsky was heavily criticized because they knew the gospel. Leo Tolstoy was amazed with the Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. But it did not resonate well with the official church. So let me come back to the Grand Inquisitor. He arrests Jesus, and during the night he goes to prison to speak to Jesus. And that conversation reveals us what Dostoevsky was thinking about the official church of his time. And Grand Inquisitor says to Jesus, look, you have created the world, and you have set this world into the motion. But when you did it, you made a huge mistake. And the mistake was that you have given to human beings a free will. Human beings do not need free will, says Grand Inquisitor. Look where that free will has brought humanity. Look how many suffering and destruction is in this world. Human beings do not need free will. All humanity needs is to be fed and to be led. And this is what we do, the church. We take them the free will, we are feeding them, and we are leading them. And they are kissing our hands, and they are kissing our feet. Why haven't you done this? The Grand Inquisitor says to Jesus. And then he continues in that conversation. Jesus is not saying anything in that conversation. He does something at the end only. So Grand Inquisitor says to Jesus, look, when you have been tempted in the desert, and when the devil came to you, and when he said, make this bread, these stones to become bread, you could have done this, says Grand Inquisitor to Jesus. You had powers, why haven't you done this? You could have made bread and feed people. This is what people need. And then Jesus said his famous words, man does not live from the bread alone. And these words are so important. I think William Shakespeare, in King Lear, he said something so important. I'm going to quote Shakespeare. He said, if you don't give to the nature more than it needs, Shakespeare has in mind human nature. If you don't give to the nature more than it needs, the human nature is not better than the one in the beast. So if you don't give to the nature more than it needs, what Shakespeare had in mind is, it is not enough for human beings just to be fed. Human beings want to know something more. They have been created for something more. They have been given the free will. If you don't give to the nature more than it needs, human beings become like beasts, says Shakespeare. And this is what Jesus said. Man does not live from the bread alone, but from the every word. But then Grand Inquisitor continues and he says, look, there was a second opportunity that the devil gave you. He told you, jump down from the temple and God will order his angels to save you. You could have done this. It would be a miracle. People would see the miracle and they would follow you. All people need is to be fed and to be led. And you have done a huge mistake by giving them the free will. That freedom has brought us to this situation. And we, the church, have to make up for all the mistakes that you have done when you created the world. And then there was a third temptation, and this was the temptation when the devil said to Jesus, kneel down before me, I will give you the whole planet to rule over. Jesus was tempted. He was tempted to take political power of this world. Even in the Gospels, when Peter says to Jesus, you should not go to Jerusalem, you should not go on the cross. And then Jesus turns back to Peter and he says, go from me, you devil. Had Peter said something wrong to Jesus? No, he didn't. Why there was such a harsh response by Jesus? Because he was constantly tempted not to go to cross. He was a young man in his 30s. No young man or even older man would go on to die on the cross. So Jesus was constantly tempted. He himself, not only other human beings, he was tempted to take this power, to rule humanity, to become a political leader, as it was nicely said in our Sabbath School quarterly. And when we have this element, that the whole human history and most of what human beings are doing is there just to rule over others, to have some kind of influence over other people. And let me read to you now the words of Jesus that you know very well, but just in the context that I was talking to. Let's read Luke chapter 22. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 22. Luke chapter 22, verse 24 and on. Luke 22, 24 and on. The text says, also a dispute arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. Although these words may be this kind of humility, may look naive, I firmly believe if we look the being of humanity as a whole and what was going on in 6,000 years of human history, the whole human history was the struggle for power. How healing sound these words. If you want to be the greatest, serve. Without these words, let's just make a comparison. For example, Muhammad, he conquered the world with sword. The first period of Muhammad, when he was in Mecca, he made some contributions to humanity. Muhammad, we have to recognize this. He introduced monotheism. One Egyptian pharaoh attempted to do this much before Muhammad, and he was assassinated by the priestly class. Muhammad succeeded in introducing to the pagan Arabs to introduce monotheism. He was fighting also against the different kind of superstition. He was very successful there. But when Muhammad moved from Mecca to Medina in 622 after Christ, there are many cases where he killed people holding his sword in his hand and chopping the heads of the people. He conquered the world with the sword. If you compare this with Jesus, I think the cross is the least expected place on this earth from which we would expect somebody to conquer the world. This is not the cross. No, not at all. But if you compare what happened there, that element of humility, if you want to be the greatest, serve. This is healing. This can help humanity, even in the 21st century, to live better lives. If political leaders and all human beings would just take this element of Christianity, if you want to be the greatest, serve in your family, in your society. If you're a politician, I think this is very healing. This is huge relevance of Jesus for the 21st century, because the man does not live from the bread alone. Let me mention the second great relevance of Jesus for the 21st century, for the humanity in its totality, but also for us individually. And this is the question of forgiveness. Let me take you back to Genesis chapter 4. I'm not going to read this because most of you know the text. There are three key personalities or protagonists in Genesis chapter 4. One is Cain, there is also Abel, and Seth is the third personality in Genesis chapter 4. And you know that the names which were given at that time to the children, they were meaningful names. And the names were changed, as you know, in the Old Testament, when the character of the person was changed also. So let me just tell you a few words about Cain. Cain comes from the Hebrew word kana, which means to get, to acquire, to possess. And you will see that meaning of the name of Cain perfectly fits within Genesis chapter 4, because Cain has a brother. Not once in Genesis chapter 4 is said that Cain is the brother of Abel. Only Abel is the brother to Cain. Cain has the brother. Not only he has the brother, he has a wife. Not only wife, he has a son. Then he has the city which he is building. He has also the country, the whole country. He is really the man who he acquires, he possesses, he has his descendants. On the other hand, Habel or Abel, the Hebrew word Habel means vapor, steam, or meaningless in the book of Ecclesiastes. This is the same word which is used in Ecclesiastes when Solomon says everything is meaningless. This is the word Habel from Genesis chapter 4. Some people believe that the book of Ecclesiastes would have never been written if there were no Genesis chapter 4. So Abel means vapor. He comes onto the stage and he represents good. Cain represents evil in this world. So Abel comes to the world scene. He does not speak. He does not have a brother. He does not have a wife. He does not have a city. He does not have a country. He has no descendants. He comes and he goes. And this, I think, describes the fragility of good on this planet. And then just to go one step further, one of the descendants of Cain is Lamech. He is described at the end of Genesis chapter 4. And Lamech was the first polygamist. And Lamech, probably there was a fire, probably this is the setting, and he sings a strange song, Lamech. His wives are probably sitting around the fire. He has probably his sword around his wrist. He dances, probably. This is how many commentators describe this singing of Lamech. But his song is a very strange song, if you analyze this. Among other words, he says, if Cain kills 7 times, Lamech will kill how many times? 77. So you see, if Cain killed his brother Abel, if it is number 7, the evil progresses. At the level of Lamech, it is 77. And when we read Genesis chapter 4, there is a huge pessimism growing on. The humanity has there is no aspirin for humanity's evils. Evil just progresses. Even evil is acquiring, taking more and more cities, people, and so on and so on. And then comes Jesus. If you want, you can read this. This is in Matthew chapter 18. And you know these words. I'm not going to read this to you. Jesus said, when Peter comes to him and he says, how many times should I forgive? And Jesus said, up to 7 times. What was the answer of Jesus? Not 7 times, but 77. I'm sure that Jesus knew Genesis chapter 4. And Jesus is just reversing. He's bringing something new to humanity. And this is very interesting. The element of forgiveness, without which humanity cannot simply exist. I think this is one of the essential characteristics of human race at all. We as human beings, we should be able to forgive, but not only to forgive. Let me emphasize this second element of forgiveness, brothers and sisters. We should be able also to accept forgiveness. If you look at the case of Friedrich Nietzsche that I mentioned earlier, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, that at the end of his life, his mother was very pious. His grandparents, from both mother and father, they were even missionaries. His mother was so sad when Friedrich came to her one day and he said, I'm going to go my own way. I don't believe in God anymore. But after all these harsh accusations that God is dead, one day when he was in Italy, in the city of Torino, he saw somebody whipping his horse. He ran after the horse, he hugged the horse, and he lost his sound mind. For the next 8 years, Nietzsche is going to live in the most humiliating conditions. So one author that I read recently said that he drank his own urine and so on and so on. One of the sharpest minds of human history. But when analysis, those who know Friedrich very well, when they describe his spiritual crisis, they are not speaking about the fact that he was not able to forgive. But his problem is that he was not ready to accept forgiveness from God. When I was giving Bible studies back in Belgrade, 30 maybe years ago. And I had a young girl, biology student from Belgrade University. She would come for Bible studies. And every time, maybe after third or fourth study, I asked that person to pray. She never wanted to pray. And then I pressed her. I said, "Why you don't want to pray?" And she said, "I don't want to humiliate myself before any person, including God himself." And there are millions of people in this world. They are not ready to accept forgiveness from God. And let me tell you that I believe to forgive and to be able to accept forgiveness, this is so essential to the survival of any human being and for the humanity in general. Let me come back to Dostoevsky and to Brothers Karamazov. Dostoevsky says no human being can live as an island. We all live in relationships. But the major obstacle, says Dostoevsky, for the harmonious relationship is cruelty, according to Dostoevsky. We are cruel to each other very often. And he believes that the aspirin, the solution for cruelty, is forgiveness. But then he describes, look at his examples, how difficult it may be sometimes to forgive. He describes the case of one little boy. He was the son of a servant woman at the big estate of one wealthy man. He was general. And the little boy is throwing stones, like many little boys are doing. As he is throwing stones, he hit the leg of the favorite dog of the general. And when general comes back home, he sees that his favorite dog is limping. And he immediately says, "Who has done that?" And they said, "The little boy, the son of a servant woman on your estate." And the general orders all his servants to come. He orders the little boy to come. He brings all his dogs. He orders the little boy to be stripped of his clothes. He orders the little boy to run. He releases all his dogs, and the little boy is torn apart by the dogs in front of his mother. And now two brothers, Ivan, who is an agnostic in that novel, The Brothers Karamazov, and his younger brother Alyosha, who is the pious monk of the Russian Orthodox Church. Ivan says now, he asks, Ivan has no problem with the existence of God. He can believe that there is God. But his problem is how God manages this world. He cannot agree with God. He believes that he would do a better job when it comes to managing the world. And after that example that Ivan describes to Alyosha, Ivan turns to his pious, very religious monk, and he says, "What would you do to the general?" And Ivan shouts, and he says, "The general should be shot." And Ivan, the unbeliever, he says, "Look, even you, the pious monk of the Russian Orthodox Church, you are not able to forgive." And Alyosha says, no, I didn't really think so. But Ivan says, yes, you just said so. And then Ivan says, he says, should the mother of the little boy forgive the general? And then comes the final blow. Should the little boy forgive the general? And these are very difficult questions. In that conversation between Jesus and the Grand Inquisitor in the prison, at the end, Jesus comes and he kisses the Grand Inquisitor. It was according to Dostoevsky, it was an invitation to accept forgiveness. So I believe that there is no aspirin for cruelty of humanity. There is so much cruelty. I have to confess in front of you that as all of you, as I read the newspapers and watch what's going on in the world, and when I see the boy of 9, 10 years old, that he's cutting the throat of grown-up people on a daily basis, there is so much cruelty, there is so much violence in the world. My senses are not able to receive them anymore. I think something is going, when I see, I just, sorry, I just jump over these. I cannot watch these pictures anymore. There is so much cruelty. There is so much violence. How far humanity is going to go with all this? Is there any solution? Can Muhammad give the solution? I don't think so. Buddha? I don't think so. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. I don't think that Buddha can bring. I think that we as Christians, we all have experienced the peace which comes from God Himself, from the forgiveness which comes from God alone. I think that offer by God to forgive us our sins, it is something indispensable for the mental, spiritual, but also physical life. Because mental and physical, spiritual and physical, are so interconnected. And you know so many people in this world. I have 2 examples only last week that I learned. My old friends, I think Elder Hazi may know some of these people. I learned that they have cancer. And when I thought about their life in the last only 5 to 10 years, I know that they went through some real struggle in their family life, with their children and so on. So there is a close connection between spiritual and physical. We all need forgiveness, and we need to be forgiven. This is no other being in the universe can offer us forgiveness. No. Is Jesus indispensable for the humanity in the 21st century? Yes. I think humanity cannot continue, and I think the madness will become, madness is spreading all around, of course, throughout the world. So this is the second great importance and relevance of Jesus for the 21st century. Let me mention the third one. Before I read, let me read to you one quote from Martin Heidegger, one of the German philosophers, a great thinker. He said something like this: as soon as man comes to life, he is old enough to die. As soon as man comes to life, he is old enough to die. The greatest, yes, this deeply embedded thirst for power, it is there in humanity. There is need for forgiveness, but probably the greatest need of humanity is the need to find a solution for the question of death. And how naive look many of these atheists, especially those belonging to the new atheist movement, claiming that we can do without God. In the 21st century, we don't need this anymore. It was Albert Camus, one of the great thinkers of the 20th century from France. Albert Camus raised a legitimate question. You may not agree with him, but I think he's right. He said that the key question in philosophy is the question of suicide. But when he develops that argument, he's saying something that all of you know, and this is very logical. He says, if all human work on this planet is going to end in that little hole in the ground, then we have to ask the question whether it is worth even living. Leo Tolstoy, in War and Peace, it was on BBC, I think, in the last several weeks. The question is, Tolstoy says, what will happen with everything I'm doing today? What will happen with what I'm going to do tomorrow? Why, Tolstoy asked, why love somebody? Is there any meaning in human life? And if that is the last point where we are going to go to, then of course the question of meaning of human life is of great importance. I think, I hate to be just some religious preacher with emotions and I think we have to use our mind too and to think about that. One of you mentioned to me that he saw me on this BBC program, The Big Questions. I was there, yes. Before we went on the show, we had discussion even behind it. There were 10 atheists, teachers, professors from Cambridge, Oxford, and here from London, from some universities. And yes, there was one former Adventist, member of the Adventist church. And she was now atheist too. But we discussed. I believe, and you know all these discussions, but this is what I deeply believe. Let me start with a very simple stuff. If you see, for example, your name, Brian, for example, you see the name Brian written on the sand of some beautiful beach. You are flying and you see Brian. Would you ever, anybody with the common sense in his head, would anybody ever think that that name, Brian, was written there on the sand by some chance, that the waves, stones were moving? Nobody with the minimum of common sense would think. He would think somebody with the same name or somebody put it there. But now, let's go one step further. You know that in each one of our cells, there are 100 trillion cells in average human body. In each cell, there is a name, your name, written in each one of 100 trillion cells. And that name has no 5-6 letters. It has 3.7 billion letters. And you know this, I'm not telling you anything new, but these are basically 4 letters, but in different combinations. And because of these are not stupid information. This is extremely complex information there. And because of that name written in each one of our cells, this is how our nose looks, our hair, this is how we walk, how we talk. If you can accept that all the works written by Shakespeare are just the result of pure chance, good luck. I cannot believe that. Or if you believe that Johann Sebastian Bach, I think he is one of the greatest musicians of human history, that all he wrote, it is just pure chance. I don't think people with common sense can believe this. So how then can we accept the fact that all this came through the natural selection by pure, as Richard Dawkins says, random and unrandom. And when he says unrandom, then immediately there is an intelligence there. What he means by unrandom moving of particles within the matter, it is very complex. I think that science today, and I think Dawkins and Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens, he is not alive anymore, but they were preaching from all the pulpits in the world that science is based on evidences. The theory of evolution is based on evidences. Religion, it is just based on emotions, unfounded. I don't think so. I think that the contemporary science is leading us to the conviction that this world could not be the result of the pure chance. There had to be some mind which is beyond our comprehension. When I think about God, I think usually what kind of being it is that he could put these planets into its orbits and so on and so on. And even today, we don't know what is gravity. We don't know. Yes, Newton have discovered this. But when you come to the bottom of what gravity is, or what is 200 constants in the universe, and if you change only one slightly, nothing would function. So I believe God was a great mathematician and a lover of beauty, So I think when we read, when we see what is going on today, it can help us. Let me just mention a few more things which are being discussed today in the literature in Britain, here in Great Britain. There was a discussion, especially it was discussed by Dr. Rowan Williams, which is considered to be one of the great thinkers today in Great Britain. He is talking especially about consciousness, human consciousness. Nobody understands what is consciousness. Richard Dawkins says, in the future we will. How, if everything is material, because evolution, the theory of evolution is reductionism. It reduces everything to the moment of particles. But how these physical particles produce now something immaterial, spiritual. If you give the mirror to the monkey, he would never recognize that it is himself. Only human beings can recognize themselves. Only we have a self-awareness. Only we are able to ask questions, to wonder about the universe. So it is, I think, consciousness. Already René Descartes attempted to solve this problem. But I think science today is leading us, or let me, to God. And let me add another point. For example, language. Human beings are using syntax in their language. It is so complex. Animals have some way of communicating, but this is very simple. But human beings are using syntax. How it was developed? Richard Dawkins will tell you by selfish gene. One day, one child was born with. But if that child really was born with that selfish gene which made him able to talk, with whom that child was talking to? So human language is such a complex thing. Or for example, freedom that Dostoevsky was talking about, freedom. It is beyond comprehension. Computers, in its essence, are pretty stupid. We are talking about intelligence now, artificial intelligence, but all the computers are based on, this is binary systems, on zeros and ones. And they are predetermined. Yes, they can learn maybe from something that, but yes, they are predetermined. But human beings have a freedom to choose. Somebody is saying, yes, I can stretch my hand, but in the middle of stretching, I can decide, no, I'm going to pull it back. It is such a complex process in human mind. Freedom. What is freedom? Nobody knows what is freedom. What is language? What is consciousness? How material produces spiritual? Miracles that probably we'll never learn in this life. But all of this leads us to God. And you know, theory of evolution starts with already existing DNA and RNA molecules. Before that, there is nothing. Theory of evolution is not able to tell you, where do we come from? What is the meaning of human life? So as we progress as humanity, I think science is telling us that there is somebody who created life. And it was, if we have witnessed life is a miracle. To be alive today and sitting here in this beautiful church, it is a miracle for all human beings. And Blaise Pascal said, what is easier to believe? That something that already existed can exist again, or that something that never existed can exist. In other words, Blaise Pascal, the great French thinker, said, life did exist. So if we have witnessed the existence of life, why it is so difficult to believe in the resurrection? That same God is able to bring life back. So I think the question of the issue of life, which answers the greatest problem of humanity, can be brought only by Jesus himself. Without Jesus or God, no hope for humanity as far as I can see. And let me mention the last one, the fourth one. And this is the question of love. Let me read you one sentence by Oscar Wilde. He said, "Have you ever loved anyone for his own sake?" No, says Oscar Wilde. Have you ever loved, listen one more time, have you ever loved anyone for his own sake? No. I have always loved for my own sake, says Oscar Wilde. But then he added a short sentence, and he said, only Jesus. Have you ever loved anyone for his own sake? No, he said, I always loved for my own sake. Only Jesus. So when Jesus came, and Jesus says, I'm not from this world, I came from another world. And the disciples were amazed. Where did you come from? From some other planet? Yeah, Jesus is constantly emphasizing, I am not from this world. And Jesus has brought that medicine which can heal humanity in such a way, because all human relationships are based usually on debit credit, whatever we do. And I believe that all human love is permeated in one way or another by selfishness. But that love, which has been demonstrated on the cross of Golgotha, I think this is the demonstration of love without any selfishness and interest. Love is the governing principle of the universe, and we are invited to think about that love and to pray to God to help us to at least partially participate in that love without interest. So, is Jesus relevant to the humanity in the 21st century? I believe humanity has no future at all. Because of the desire of human race to rule over others, humanity needs to hear the words of Jesus. If you want to be the greatest, serve. To the humanity which is not able to forgive and which is exercising such cruelty, which is beyond imagination, Jesus says, forgive. Not up to 7 times, but to 77 times. But not only forgive, be able to accept forgiveness from other people and from God himself. And then Jesus says, my will for this world is not death. There is life, eternal life. You know how many times in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I will resurrect you in the last day. I will resurrect you. Jesus brought the message of life to this world. And of course, we should think about the love of Jesus, which is not permeated with selfishness. It is divine, cosmic love. And may God help us to have hope in that world which Jesus promised us. Amen.